suffering imposed on the Iraqi people by the United Nations mandated legal international sanctions, by the way, but still, all right, let's lift the sanctions. But the price of that must be removing the regime, mustn't it? Because why are people suffering so much? Because while the Iraqis are starving, Saddam has built one palace in every province of the country, just to name one thing, just in his own name. It's sanctions plus Saddam that do the damage. Remove the regime, we can lift the sanctions. They would all say, we're not against the death of 100,000 Iraqis a year that much. Removing the dictator, much too high a price. That's bad faith, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends. That's bad faith. They didn't care as much as they said they did. Now we have removed the sanctions and the regime and presumably cut the civilian casualties at least significantly, to that extent and for that reason. Any thanks for it? Not that I've heard lately. No.
Now, people may want to come back on the argument.
That's just an instance.
But I just, yeah.
Here, it's a question there not of what you think, but of how you think, and that's how I thought.
But this is a memoir, an autobiography. And it's about people. It's about you and your friends and your supporters and your enemies.
And our games.
And sometimes people let you down. I mean, on those occasions, on Salman Rushdie too, there's that strong sense that sometimes even the people really close to you just don't get it. And
no.
There's a real, I mean, that's the personal side of these arguments that comes over.
Look, there's a friend of mine at this festival who can be mentioned, I think, in the same name, same breath as Salman's. I have a whole chapter about Salman I hope people would like to read, but she's called Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and she was born in Somalia, and on her own guess, and I think it's accurate, is the only girl in her class who's still alive. And she's incredibly charming and amusing because she amazingly thinks she's lucky, as she is, to be the only one alive. And she has survived beating, genital mutilation, forced marriage, various kinds of exile and cruelty, and also seen the total destruction of her society by theocratic goons. And there are a lot of people who think they would have sympathized with her only if she'd stayed where she was. But now that she's left all that and said goodbye to religion, goodbye to tribalism, goodbye to theocracy, she's accused of being a friend of secular Enlightenment types, you know, who don't sympathize enough with the well springs of religious belief. Well, honestly, what a waste of freedom for people to talk about her like that. Yeah. And it was the same with Salman. Here's a case, Valentine's Day 1989. The verminous theocratic leader of a foreign state that's ruined itself in war and fascism, with the war with Iraq, the demolition of its civil society, whose country's in hopeless trouble, who's trying to promote himself, thinks the best way to recover credibility is to offer money in his own name, in public, to suborn murder of a writer of fiction who lives in London and isn't an Iranian. I think that's a pretty frontal assault on everything that I love, starting with and ending with the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. A huge number of liberals and leftists say, no, the problem is not the fatwa, the problem is the novel. How does Mr. Rushdie expect to upset a great religion and get away with it? This is defeat in the mind. This is masochism of the most disgusting kind. You don't need, as Aneurin Bevan, that great Welshman, said, you don't need to muzzle a sheep. People will do all the work for you. They'll beckon on the tyranny. They'll welcome it. And the next thing you know, the worst kind of relativism has set in.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, they never.
However, one or two people have fallen out along the way in this. Not everybody has. There's a particularly good back cover for this book, which has all the usual sort of praise by Joseph Heller, Richard Dawkins, Ian McEwan, and then says...
You think that's usual?
Oh, I think so.
I had to work bloody hard to get that.
And then has a quote from Gore Vidal. I have been asked whether I wish to nominate a successor and inheritor, a Dauphin or Delfino. I have decided to name Christopher Hitchens. This, however, is firmly struck out, and thereby must hang a tale.
Yeah, well, about 12 years ago, I got a call from Gore, from Italy, saying, Christopher, do you know what the word Delfino means? And I said, actually, I don't. I didn't say, should I guess? I think I might have done. But he said, well, it's the Italian for dauphin. And I've been brooding. And he went on to say that he, as in advancing years, wondered, never having had a son, whether he should be anointing a successor. And he said, I thought of naming you. And I said, well, that's very handsome of you. I think that the architecture of the novels of the history of the United States that he's raised is extremely impressive. And he's also written some very, very enviable essays indeed. I would instance, I don't know, The Holy Family, the first one to really take the axe to the root of the Kennedy myth, and everyone probably has their favorite. So I was very gratified. He then wrote it down and sent it me as a letter. I kept it, and then a few years later I asked if I could use it as a blurb for a book, and he said yes. I partly intended that, so I did. And then something happened that I also knew might happen, which was that if you know Gore, you know that he may seem very radical and even quite left-wing, and very liberal, but in fact he's very conservative, and he's a supporter of the extreme right isolationist tradition of the United States that goes back to Charles Lindbergh and the America First movement before the Second World War, opposed to the American rescue of Europe, and let's say, to put it delicately, non-philo-Semitic in its manner. Actually, distinctly non-philo-Semitic. And I knew that he had this tendency in him, and the conspiratorial view that goes with it. But after 9/11, he gave it full rein and essentially said, it's too early to say, he wrote these words, it's too soon to tell whether Mr. bin Laden has anything to do with the blowing up of the World Trade Center. He's by no means the proven perpetrator. But it wasn't for him too early to say that he thought the Bush administration had arranged the blowing up of the World Trade Center. So I thought, no, come on, that's that. This is not a difference of emphasis at all. That's a root and branch difference. And we had a big quarrel. And he began to take back what he'd said about me. And I thought, well, since he's known to like a good feud, he can have one, can't he? And so I both reprinted it and crossed it out. So he can suck on that.
We haven't talked very much about literature, and time is running on. I'm not sure we should... what about the King of China?
Oh, Christ.
We haven't done the King of China.
We haven't done...
It's very important.
We haven't done the limericks.
We haven't done the limericks. And
what would you like to do?
I think the King of China is the key to understanding...
You think the King of China? It's a little arcane.
It's a little arcane? Come on, they're great.
They must wonder what we're...
Yes, they don't understand. You explain with the rules.
Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the book, I give instances of word games and dirty rhymes that I think are justified, well, actually partly for their own sake, but also because the more you do them, the better you get at them. And they can help to sort of build muscle in the use of language. And Peter likes very much the King of China, but I don't know, I prefer the substitute. It's easier to do.
You're in charge.
Well, look.
But they'll have to buy the book to get the King of China.
I mean, it's puerile, of course, but I know that people like filth, honestly. They do. But the word games got better when our company was joined by the great, the imperishable Salman Rushdie, who I never can believe has English as his second language. That his first language is Urdu constantly amazes me. And he generally elevated the level of games. And actually, I owe my title in part to this, because one of his games was to think of a well-known title and think of how it didn't quite make it. The Big Gatsby. For Whom the Bell Rings. 2 days in the life of Ivan Denisovich. Mr.